All right, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome all to the December meeting of the Alexandria Transit Company Board of Directors. I think the intention was that staff could have food too, so you guys should please help yourselves. So, but thank you. We appreciate the hospitality and always look forward to this meeting to share some fellowship and cheer. And so we'll try to go quickly through our agenda so we can all kind of get home and continue enjoying fellowship and probably take a lot of food with us. I'll ask the secretary to call the roll.
Chair Kaplan.
Here.
Vice Chair Kleist. Kendall Taylor. Here. Matt Harris.
Here.
Hillary Orr. Here. Ajaysha Thomas. Marat Omey. Jesse O'Connell.
Here.
Arthur Wicks.
Here.
Chair Kaplan, you have a quorum. The following are not present: Vice Chair Kleist, Ajaysha Thomas, and Marat Omey.
Okay, so Steve is traveling for work, so he has an excused absence. Marat, I believe, is not feeling well. He may join us virtually, depending on how he's doing. And Ajaysha, I think, should be on her way. So thank you, Madam Secretary. We'll ask now if we have public comment. We have a public comment policy that we read at the start of each meeting to kind of set the tone for public comment. So I'll read that and then we'll call for any speakers. We're about to convene into the public comment period of our meeting. All dashboard meetings include a public comment period at the beginning of the meeting, as we believe it is crucial for us to hear from our riders and community members. The board is here to listen. However, please keep in mind public comment period is designed to be a discussion. Accordingly, please do not expect the board to respond to your concerns or questions tonight. We take any concerns and questions seriously and need sufficient time to process and research any issues if need be. Board members will respond to your questions and concerns at a future meeting or have the proper staff member get back to you at the appropriate time. Please note that personnel matters are not part of public comment. However, please know we take any personnel questions seriously. You are asked to contact the DASH administration with any such concerns. We ask that all speakers and members of the audience maintain civility and respect for any divergent views that others possess. Further, we ask that speakers please address the comments to the board directly rather than the audience. The board will take pre-registered speakers first, and then I will invite others who wish to speak who may not have pre-registered. For future meetings, you may pre-register on the website dashbus.com on the Board of Directors page. I will now call the first speaker. Please remember each individual speaker is allotted 3 minutes for comments. If you're speaking on behalf of a neighborhood civic association or unit owners association, please identify yourself accordingly and you may be recognized for up to 5 minutes. Do we have any pre-registered speakers?
We do not.
We will now ask if there's anybody on the Zoom. Well, let me ask in the room. It looks like all staff. Anybody wish to speak? I will now ask if anybody on the Zoom wishes to be recognized. Please raise your hand. We'll pause briefly to look for anyone seeking recognition.
I do not see any hands on the Zoom.
All right, thank you, Josh. Public comment is closed. We will move on to agenda item 2, consideration of the board meeting minutes from November 8th, 2023, which were included in our packet. Are there any corrections to the minutes as they were presented? Motion by Matt. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Jesse. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Chair's report. So 3 items I wanted to touch base on. The first is you may recall that last spring we approved a 1-year extension to the contract we have with TransDev. They provide management services to the DASH organization. This was kind of as a bridge, having First Transit having been bought by TransDev to kind of provide continuity and for us to see how they performed under the new organization with the contract. But the agreement was that we would set up a committee to draft an RFP, and then we would seek proposals and do interviews with TransDev and anyone else who wished to apply. I'm going to ask that we set up a committee at this meeting, as we had agreed to do last spring, now to go ahead and prepare the RFP. I'm going to turn it over to Josh briefly, who will talk a little bit more about kind of the scope of the RFP and some changes that we're looking for potentially in that contract.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a little bit of context. Since DASH was started in 1984, it has been operated under what's called a transit management contract. This differs from some of the other local jurisdictions where they are transit contracts. Arlington, Fairfax, et cetera, would be considered a transit contract. In those situations, a contractor is paid a lump sum of money. They provide the personnel and all the operational resources, and they conduct the service under a contractor arrangement. Here we are directly employed, although our employees are employees of Transit Management of Alexandria, which is a subcorporation of formerly First Transit, now TransDev. It's simply a conduit for their employment. but all the other management decisions are made locally. In years past, my position would be a first transit or transdev position. Under the terms of the current agreement, there was such a position. In fact, the assistant general manager was also such a position, and over the years, those two were phased out, where I am now directly employed by the board under a contract. So the way that the agreement looks now is drastically different from how it started. And the services that are provided now are very different from the original design. So what I was telling the chair in my hopes in this process is that we can restructure the contract to more effectively provide the services that we need, which are largely oversight advisory services, as well as auditing services and other supplementary, resources that are known to the transit industry. So for example, Transdev is a international company in this situation who has access to a variety of policies, procedures, processes, and expertise when it comes to, for example, receipt of federal funding or collective bargaining agreements and a variety of other transit-specific services that are unique to our industry, but not otherwise provided within the city. So what I asked the chair in this was to be involved in this process as my position is not a position of the contractor anymore. I represent the customer, which is you all, and make those decisions accordingly. So it is appropriate, I think, that I would be able to serve on this committee, whereas previously that wouldn't have been the case. But the goal here is really to focus in on what are the resources that are really needed at DASH. How do we adjust that contract, potentially find some cost savings, and some opportunities for efficiency that we can build in the next proposal. So I see this as an opportunity to sort of start a blank slate, to really step back, reevaluate what do we look like today and what do we need and how do we move forward using that. I still think there's a strong case for this type of agreement and this type of relationship. It's important. It's very, very common and exists in most transit systems in Virginia and up and down the East Coast. So it is not unusual in that sense. But I'm not proposing that we would change it in a way that would structurally reorganize how the board's role plays and how that has become what it is today compared to what it was in 1984 and the years in between. So hopefully that kind of gives some context to what I was saying to the chair when we had our phone call and talked about this and some of the other things that I would like to see built into this. Certainly with whoever serves on the committee, I would dive into some more specifics, probably do some outlines internally with my team to identify where those shortcomings are, where those resources are really needed to better define them. So it wouldn't be an expectation that anybody serving on this committee would have an extensive knowledge of all those details. We would certainly bring those to the discussion.
In terms of timing, Josh, could you walk through what the commitment would be?
So the timing, this would be a July 1 agreement. So my goal here would be that we would have an RFP out by March, awarded in April, May at the latest, and then June, the board could vote to ratify that, and then we could have it in place starting July 1.
So you'd need volunteers would be essentially reviewing the draft RFP that you're bringing to them now and then doing interviews in the March, April timeframe.
Yes, and this would be a procurement. So we would follow the procurement policies in place for DASH procurements, which very much mirror that of the city and also incorporate some federal components that the cities might not. So we kind of make sure all of our bases are covered in that. But the committee members would be expected to serve in the interview process once the final firms might be selected, if there's multiple ones or if there's just one or two or whatever that selection process looks like. Anticipate those will be conducted, though it could be conducted via Zoom or here at the DASH facility, depending.
So who is interested in serving on this committee? Got 2 volunteers. Anybody else? Anybody on the city side want to be part of this? No? Okay. Well, you've got 2 volunteers. You got Matt and Jesse, so you got a good committee here. So
I got to find a way to bring Lamatte into every board meeting. Moves it quick. Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate that help.
all right.
And I'll
so-
circle back and get that process started probably after the start of the year.
Yeah.
sometime in late January.
And I think let's also leave then a placeholder here to have an updates as to where things are as we go forward to the full board. Other two items I have, so forthcoming stockholders meeting. The stockholders meeting has not yet been scheduled yet, but kind of two things related to that. One is this is the annual call that, our terms are 1 year. We serve until the next stockholders meeting. So as we will be preparing the slate in the coming weeks of board members, if you plan to step down from the board, to please let us know no later than the first week of January. If you plan to continue your service, you will be on the slate. No need to let us know, but we just want to be prepared in case anyone is chosen to step off the board at the conclusion of their term. The other item, and this kind of, we'll be talking about the board recruitment later. I know Matt will be able to kind of give us an update on that. And we have so the timeline and kind of advertising strategy that we've provided for all of you here at the table in your packet. As we were sort of looking at the timeline for getting a new board member seated, we were sort of looking at the February stockholder meeting, which in the bylaws for Dash, the stockholder meeting is set to be held each February. That hasn't always happened, but that is what our bylaws state. We realize that's going to be a challenging date to meet. And so as we were talking about, well, do we ask the city now that we kind of postpone that, or are there things we can do related to the recruitment timeline to try to meet that? We thought, we should probably put more flexibility in our bylaws as to when the stockholders meeting is held. Had run this by Hillary, who said from a staff perspective that they would be supportive of that. So in January, I want to bring forward a bylaws amendment that will just say the stockholders meeting shall be held once a year in the first 3 months of the calendar year at a date to be determined mutually agreeable by the board and the stockholders. And so we'll have to vote on that to include that as stockholders meeting, but I think that will help on both sides. It will mean that we'll have to look at the bylaws and just see what it says specifically about our terms. If it says the terms, because the term could be 10 months, could be 14 months, depending on year to year how the stockholder meetings fall, and we can address that in the bylaws too if they need to be changed. If it says it just served till the next stockholders meeting, then that's not going to be an issue. We'll look at that as well. But I think that will be helpful to have. And finally, on scheduling of the February board meeting, this is also related as we were looking at the recruitment potentially, and then also just the calendar overall. Our February board meeting falls on Valentine's Day, which for some people, Jaysha's saying she wants. Well, we're trying to be attentive to that. I think last year our stockholders meeting was on Valentine's Day, so I think some of us were over in the council chambers. But for two reasons. One is so we could move to February 7th. That would allow us, if the stockholders meeting is at the second legislative meeting in February, to finalize board member selections to send on to council in time to meet the submission deadline. And it also would allow you that if you have someone you want to spend Valentine's Day with, that you could potentially do that. But I need to know but February 7th is really the only day we could move to. So I need to ask if there's interest in that. If we don't have a majority of the board that can do February 7th, then we're going to stick with the 14th. So let me, I see some of you checking your calendars, it looks like, so I'll give you a moment to do that. And then I'll just ask for a show of hands who wants to move to February 7th. And if I don't get a majority, then we'll move on in the discussion. So
why don't we make it a prom here?
A prom here. Well, I was thinking, I could make cookies again for us, but again, you might not want to not be with your Dash family, and our staff might want to be with their loved ones too. But so who is able to make a February 7th meeting? 1, 2. Oh, it's a 3. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I didn't count. So it was Art, Kendall, Jesse, me, Matt, Ajayesha. Okay. Well, if all 6 of us can come, then we have a quorum on February 7th. So I think we're good with that. I mean, Hillary, would that be?
I still preferred on the original days.
You were being facetious. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Who has very strong feelings that they don't want to be here on Valentine's Day? So nobody. Okay. So we'll stick with February 14th. That may require us to move the stockholders meeting it may require us to ask for a later stockholders meeting.
Well, if the purpose is to get in before the stockholders meeting, I think that's a different issue.
Well, we haven't set the date yet, so we were going to go to the city and ask. Now, our bylaws has said do say February, but that hasn't stopped. Usually, almost always on the city side, where they've said, "Hey, we can't meet with you in February. Come in March," or even I think one year it was in April. So I'm okay with that being later, even though our bylaws say that, and we'll address that with the bylaws change, but, February 7th would, if council insists that we make the second legislative meeting, would help us get that agenda item up there.
Sorry, are you saying that if we did the stockholders in the February 27th meeting, then does that help with all, that helps with all the recruitment stuff?
Potentially, yeah, because then we want to make sure we have that candidate on the slate and that council sees the whole slate of candidates, because otherwise we might have to submit materials too early, and then we would have to have a blank there until we have one or two names to supply. Because as we get into the board recruitment timeline, you'll see that it's going to be we're not going to be able to vote in January on seating on who we want to put on the slate. So that was the reason why we were suggesting it, but I think we could just ask to have the stockholders meeting in March this year. And
I was, sorry, Mr. Chair.
yeah, please.
I just wanted to add that part of this whole discussion is the challenge of then when council gets started on the budget process, which starts in March.
Right.
That's according to the budget calendar. So starts February 27th, actually. So the first legislative meeting is actually that week of Valentine's Day,
right,
which was part of that discussion. And of course, you've already pointed out the challenge, which is the submission of materials. Because there's such an early submission of materials challenge there. But just like if we don't get it in February, it's probably, to your point, might be much later in the year, depending on how it works out with the budget stuff.
And we do we like to get an hour. Sometimes we don't get an hour before them, and we may, Josh, to your point, also may make it more likely that we get more of the 10-minute stockholder meeting, which is just the business items, which isn't great because we sort of use that as our work session to try to brief council on our priorities. But it is important that we do the recruitment properly. And as we look at the timeline, we're not going to cut off the receipt of application deadline is until December 29th. So we're not going to be able to have interviews and final recommendations to the board, I think, in time to make our January meeting. So.
David, I think with the submission materials, we can update the names like fairly. But yeah, Monday, if it's literally just that here, that part.
Yeah, the only thing, just because we work so differently with other boards and commissions, that I don't want them to be then surprised by names that were submitted, especially if there are other candidates who might go to council and say, hey, you're the stockholders, you should do things differently. And that's why I just don't want them to feel that we had held that information back. And so I wanted that to go up at the same time everything else did. I guess if we're able to get it to them before it's distributed to the council members, then that may be okay, assuming that the staff that prepares that can accommodate that, which it sounds like they could if we voted on the 14th. Okay. So Josh, let me ask you, as we stand here, assuming the stockholders meeting is on the 27th, which is a big assumption because as Art points out, the budget process does start that night, but we can certainly ask for that. It sounds like we can work with that here. And anything internally that we should consider before we finalize that? Stick with February 14th.
Yeah, I think the internal challenges are minor.
Okay.
There's not a lot of internal challenges. I just want to make sure that everyone is comfortable in understanding some of the pressures we might run into depending on, because when we schedule that stockholders meeting, to your point, it's outside of the regular meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It's just literally tacked on to the front of a pre-scheduled meeting, assuming they don't already have something tacked on the front, which it sounds like a lot of times they do. So that's the other thing I just wanted to communicate, but we're flexible. We'll work with it. I just didn't want anybody sitting there scratching their head saying, why aren't we meeting with stockholders until the summer? I'm saying that's an extreme example, but I understand it could be a possibility if there's two booked up.
I also do.
I feel like, yes, the budget stuff goes on, but there's an ability to fit this in between February and June.
Okay. Should we start? Typically we start engaging with the clerk. I assume we schedule through the clerk's office that we start like right after the new year to get that schedule with them. Should we? Would it be better if we talked with them now to find out if they really want us in February or if they can?
Definitely
give us
started. You already
Oh,
started.
you've already started. Okay.
She's already.
Still waiting. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I told them March 12th.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, if we get that date, then that's great. Then we'll, whatever happens here, we'll have that finished with plenty of time then. Okay. So we will stick with February 14th. That's all I had in my report. I'll turn over to Hillary for a TNS report.
Okay, thank you. I only had one item on my report. Just wanted to provide an update on the TRIP grant that you all had supported and we applied for. It was a mid-cycle grant application to DRPT, and this was to provide temporary shelters at the former Landmark Mall site until we're able to fully build our transit center, which is probably going to be more like 2028. So it's a high ridership area, and we wanted to make sure we had some shelters there. So we were awarded that grant. So I believe the city was awarded $545,000, and then we had to put in about $250 on our side to match that grant. So, and then we will be bringing to you next month the TRIP call for this year's round has come out, so that'll be an item that we'll talk about next month with you all.
Just a question on that. So staff prioritizing locations for amenities. Is there a public input component to that, determining where they are, or?
We are going to use the inventory that
Okay.
we did this past year to look at prioritizing ridership and then where there are amenities and figure out the priorities that way.
Okay. And then I know WMATA budget has just come out probably after you'd submitted this report. So I tried not to look at that because I didn't want to get worked up too much. But in terms of just ways that we can be advocates with the city, I mean, I know they'll have their hearing process in the, probably the early spring. But whatever we can do to try to be helpful in raising concern about loss of service, we want to be a voice and to be in, echo what the city is going to say about that.
Yes,
So,
we will keep you posted.
okay. And then anything about a stadium coming to Potomac here?
I mean, I know about what you guys do,
Okay.
so.
Sorry, I have buttonhole Josh and asked the same question when I walked in the room. So
Some exciting news that will keep us busy. I
All
thought
right,
about
fair
bringing it up, and I was like, I'm not, not yet, not ready.
oh, it's an arena. Okay, I apologize. And an entertainment district too, which yeah, I mean, it's going to be exciting to think about what can be done there and to tap into the existing infrastructure. Thank you, Hillary. So Matt is here for the board member recruitment update, and I'll have Matt kind of speak to the work he and Murat have done, but I'll point out that this sheet is on your at your seat with both the timeline and then what particularly wanted to give the board an opportunity, because we're very early in the recruitment, is looking at item 3, the advertising. So if there's anything that's missing from this list, I think this would be very helpful to get feedback, because we're still early enough in the recruitment that we can adjust and reach out to other stakeholders if we need to do anything else. And also just to remind, I know Beth sent the announcement out to all of us, as well as it going out on the e-blast. Please share liberally within your networks in the city. We want to get a really, really good solid pool. But I'll have Matt talk to where they are now. But as I said, please, if you see anything that's missing or that we should do, please bring that up tonight.
All right, thanks, Dave. I'll be real brief. So Murat was in Turkey, so mostly I was working with Beth. Beth, thank you so much for your help here. I reviewed all of the submissions from the last time and the documents that we used to base this as a template when Murat and Jesse came on board. I slightly modified the dates, and as you can see, there's a little bit of flexibility, but we hope to have before you all at our February meeting who we've selected, or I guess there'll be maybe, hopefully, a number of people we've selected. How many people do we anticipate? Up to 2. So I'm looking forward to that. Rest of this is pretty self-explanatory. As David said, we'll work on the advertising, get that out. Beth, has it gone out already? Okay, great. Okay, great. And when the applications come in, you'll funnel them to both of us?
Yes.
Okay, Perfect, perfect. So really that's about it. If anybody has any questions, obviously, we'll look for diversity as well as people who specialize in government relations, outreach, things like that.
I had a couple of questions.
Sure.
So civic associations, are you reaching out to people who live in condos like I do? Or like, you're just sticking with like single family homes?
So the list that we have is mostly citizens.
Are there apartments as well? Because we know we have like major owners of apartment complexes in the city. Or do we have relationships with those folks to advertise Dash things with? I don't, but I'm just curious, like, it's gonna be an ongoing thing communicating Dash announcements to the public. We should have those relationships. If we don't, maybe you should work with the city, the zoning for housing people, so they have to do all this outreach, connect with each other to like figure out what their lists are, and maybe you can use that. Just trying to cast a huge wide net would be awesome. So go to zoning page, like.
Do you think the housing department should,
zoning, one of those.
because they,
Nancy or who's Helen housing.
Helen McElvain?
Yeah, like, we're, as we talked about before, like, don't work in silos. Your department, work together as a city. Oh, comms. And community engagement, the new name for OCC, yeah. Other thing, ads, when are those going out? Isn't the deadline like December 29th or something to apply? So when the ads hit the newspapers or you do digital ads, like what's the budget for that? Does Alex now?
Can we put notices on the buses themselves on the inside?
Yes, we can do that.
Because, riders would be great. And it's probably free for us too. So,
Yeah, that's true. Oh, sorry, I forgot that. Yeah, I think those are like my main questions that stood out to me. I know Elaine is leaving the city, but she has.
I had heard, I'd read an article that Elaine Scott was retired. I wasn't sure if she has retired yet or if it was coming. Okay. Okay, so were we able to make contact with her and, okay. And, yeah, this list does look good. I even wonder with, and we've used this on our automated announcements when we've had feedback open for, say, our ATV or when we were doing, other outreach. I don't know if that's something I don't know how easy it is to fold that in to announce, say, when we're getting the King Street Metro Station that you can apply. Is that feasible? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. 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 Yeah, it's something we should think about because everybody will hear it then, because the signs are above you and people are looking down at devices now as opposed to looking up around them. So, but yeah, understand the lead time required for that. So, anybody else have feedback on the recruitment plan? Do we know if we've gotten any applications? Two? Okay. Okay. It's been out for less than a week, so that's good. Okay. Yeah, the timing of the holidays isn't ideal, but hopefully we can catch people now before they kind of disengage to start traveling. All right, thank you, Matt, and appreciate the work you and Marat are doing on this. All right. Do any others have updates related to boards, commissions, or groups that they are part of that they would like to bring forward? No? Okay. General Manager's report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. A couple of things we need to cover tonight. The first one here is going to be an action item. This is our annual discussion regarding our proposed current services budget. Just a quick reminder of how this process works. Under the timeline of the city's Office of Management and Budget, they are providing us with dates for submittals and working jointly with our team here internally to craft a budget that is reflective of what it takes to do the same thing we do today, next year, with the guidelines from the city that everything is to remain flat, with the exception of contractually obligated increases. In our case, that is primarily the stipulations of the collective bargaining agreements and the impacts of those. So in the development of this budget, we followed that process. It is a little different this year. In past years, we've done current services, I believe, and supplementals and reductions together, or even supplementals and reductions have been done after current services. But ultimately, we are having a meeting actually tomorrow to go over all of this with OMB, the OMB team. And so we're looking forward to that discussion. We'll be able to share with them the details of what's been presented to you this evening, contingent upon your approval and any other comments that you might have that are important to share with them. So in whole, the proposed operating budget this year increases by about $3.1 million, which is reflective of about 9.9% total increase, bringing the new total operating budget for Dash to $34,839,409. The key things to understand that are going into these numbers. As I mentioned, this is fiscally constrained, so we are looking simply at doing exactly what we're doing now, next year, and capturing any efficiencies. We do have a new collective bargaining agreement in place. Now, I want to point out that it could be a little confusing because we have a 9.5% increase to absorb in the collective bargaining agreement along with a 4% increase. However, through a combination of tweaking line items and adjusting our budget and reflecting real costs based on experience this year and all the changes that have happened since the budget development process in the fall of last year, a lot has changed. So we have a much more real picture today of what we can do. The city manager in the collective bargaining process agreed to a 5% increase in year 1 and 4% in years 2 and 3. So that brings you to about a 9% total increase that the city manager agreed to. So we are 0.9% over that, which I feel like is a pretty good hit on the target there of what the city manager agreed to, including the fact that we have a full year of line 30 and 33 operations. Those were a supplemental that was awarded by council last year during the budget process, and so forth. So that 0.9% is comprised primarily of the other impacts we'll go over here in just a minute. But I do want to note what is not captured in this increase is that the TRIP grant ends this year. That TRIP grant is a reduction in grant funding of $1.7 million. That is not captured in this $3 million figure. And that is because the $3 million figure is expressly an indication of the increase in costs, whereas the TRIP revenue has also gone down. So that goes into on top of the $3 million of the city subsidy. So the total budget request will actually be more than the 3.1 million. And that's actually reflected in your packet. The numbers have those for you, but I've kept that out of that to help understand what is the true cost increases that we're dealing with and not lumping in the TRIP grant. On the compensation side, you can see that's about 2.7 million of the budget. As I just mentioned, we have the reduction in the TRIP funding that's going to impact the city's total subsidy. We have maintenance parts and supplies, which is increasing a little over $500,000. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. We have also talked previously about the shortfalls in the ad program, although I will say that things are improving and the team is working hard to put into place some changes that will hopefully turn that around. So we have made a minor adjustment down in that so that we are projecting a realistic revenue figure as opposed to just a revenue figure that was being carried over year by year. We want to be as factually accurate as possible in this process. The other thing that we've done is we have confirmed formally with the Federal Transit Administration that we are able to reinstate charter services with some stipulations. Charter services were previously taken out of our budget because when you receive federal funding, you are prohibited from operating charters. It is considered an unfair competition by government with private entities. And so because the the primary fleet that we are using for charter services, and in fact, the only fleet that we will be using with charter services are not FTA funded assets. And because the salaries and wages of the staff operating these services are not federally funded, we are was basically able to provide those services. So we kind of skirt around the charter regulation. We can't do a charter with an FTA asset. So when we have those here, we're going to have to be very clear and very careful to ensure that we are isolating those services as well as those assets, as well as any work that goes into them from the charter program. So we're starting out here with $130,000 estimated increase in revenue as a result of the charter services. The team has also spent a great amount of time reevaluating our charter rates, making sure that they are appropriate, that they are updated, and that we also have the infrastructure in place to do this. To be perfectly candid, our primary role here is to provide public transit service to the city of Alexandria. That is our core mission. Charter services should only be something that is done once that primary mission is met. And what we'll talk about later in the meeting, a little bit about our current fiscal year, is that one of the challenges we have is meeting current services today. So this is a number that is probably conservative, and it's intentional because we do know that we are already incurring overtime in an effort to meet our current services. So we have to be careful about that. And I want to be very clear that we're not going to be doing charters and forgetting to run line 30, at 8 o'clock at night because we didn't have enough drivers. We can't be doing that. The chart here is included also in your board packet. In fact, there is much more detail in your board packet that is not on the slides. So certainly we'll be happy to answer your more detailed questions as you have them. But as you can see here, the total change in personnel as well as non-personnel, what the numbers are. And the majority of that cost increase is going to be personnel related. The city operating contribution you can see here is the 4.4 million along with then the trolley amount. Edward, you were on here. Can you confirm for me that the trolley amount is or is not built into that 4.4 million? It is separate, correct?
It is separate. That is correct.
Thank you. By the way, Edward is here. He is attending because he has a sick mom at home, so he is on baby duty. We haven't seen the baby yet, but we will at some point. Again, the trip program reduction is reflected there. And we are now going into the first year where there is no state operating assistance replacing our fare box revenue. You can see the changes respectively to charters and miscellaneous. The last thing that I will mention here, as I do every year, is it's important for us to look at what other bills the city is paying when it comes to transit and how we are doing respectively to that. So this comparison here is an informational item only, but this is reflective of Metro Bus, not Metro Rail, just Metro Bus services, and what the operating cost per platform hour is of Metro Bus in comparison to the operating cost of Dash. And you can see that Dash is about $123 per platform hour, whereas Metro Bus is $171, and that was their last fiscal year. So that would be probably up. Of course, we talked about how we don't want to talk about the Metro budget, so we won't talk about that. But I think it's always an important understanding reflecting the services that the city is paying for any bus service that is running in the community. So again, the total budget, line item budget, is provided in your packet on page 11. Edward and I are here to answer your questions about that. One other thing I will note is you look at the budget, which is included in your packet compared to the budget that is, I'm sorry, the budget in your packet has 3 columns. So page 11, if you take a look at that now, you will see the left-hand most column, FY25 current services. This is the proposed budget with the bottom line being about $34 million, almost $35 million. And then the FY24 board approved budget, and then there's an FY24 OMB budget. The reason these lines are provided for you is to help understand a little bit how the bottom line is the same, but as we know, we work through this budget process before the city's budget process goes through. Then that's completed. And then a number is brought back to this board in the spring. And then in the summer, this board votes to adopt a final budget. And those line items get moved around a little bit by this board, and that's what happened last year. So the reason that this is in here is to help show the correlation for OMB staff as they look at the comparisons between line items and help them understand what are the differences and why those are there. This is not an unusual thing. It's happened for as long as I've been at Dash. It's partially the nature of how the organization is set up and the relationship, but it was an important thing to make sure we didn't lose where numbers were, where they were falling, and what the changes were in those. So we've always made sure to look at the bottom line in the end. Today, you are asked to discuss and consider an action to approve this. A draft submittal has been submitted to OMB that has happened in the past and has to happen often as a result of the timing of their processes, but certainly we can convey any priorities or any other items that comments the board might include here in our discussion with them tomorrow. So there's still opportunity to do that.
Two quick questions, Josh. One, back to the platform hour cost. I love that comparison. I think it's really helpful to have the context of how we're doing within the region. I'm curious though, both of those numbers, how do those compare nationally? Like, are we within the range that other bus services in other cities, or are we an outlier one way or the other?
Well, I'm going to let Edward prepare to chime in on this. He may have some additional perspectives. My perspective on it, having dealt with other systems, is that we are in this area on the higher end of a national average, simply because of the urban environment. But from an urban perspective, we are on the lower end as a system. The challenge we run into is comparison with peers, which we do a lot of. We haven't done that here because you can pick and choose a lot of different scenarios, but we think about it from this perspective. The city is paying for Dash and Metro. They're not paying for ART or Fairfax. That's not. But certainly we would be more than happy to look at those comparison figures and provide them for you all as a follow-up.
I was mostly asking just out of curiosity and context.
We have historically been very competitive from a cost per hour perspective. We saw a huge spike following the collective bargaining process. One thing I will note, and I'm just going to say this because they're being very vocal about this, you may see and hear in the presentation from WMATA, which by the way, they'll be doing tomorrow, of their budget, there is a slide in there that shows Dash as the system in the region with the most substantial increases since 2019 of any system. It's a bar chart. And I believe they show what, 13% or something like that. There's a challenge. There's a problem with that slide. So if you start getting questions or someone says, gee, WMATA's out there talking about how they've only gone up 2 or 3% year over year. And here we are in Alexandria, we're the outlier, having increased 13% compared to 2019. It's not a fair comparison, primarily because that's when collective bargaining went into place. Right. So we saw in the past 5 years, the most substantial year over year budget increases in the history of the system. Right. And I know the city is grappling with that across the city. It's not necessarily unique to us. So I just want to put that out there. We asked them not to use that slide, and I was reviewing their packet today, and it's sure in there. So it's going to be talked about tomorrow, and it may end up in the media at some point that, you know, respectively, WMATA has kept their amounts low. Because again, I understand their point is trying to say, hey, we've been held to this 2 to 3% cap, but everybody else is going up. We all know why. It's, you know, inflation costs, it's labor costs, all those things. But it's a strange comparison that doesn't really work well. And we actually had some conversation with TNS staff and whatnot, and everybody kind of understands that. But I wanted to be clear with the board about that.
And then my second question, I know in at least last year's budget, but I would assume prior years, the volatility around fuel ended up being kind of the most consequential thing for making budget projections that let us know very good. What are you guys envisioning this year? What are the forecasts for volatility in fuel, and how might that impact this budget?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because that is one of the components of us reconciling the current year forecasts and how we're working to try to make sure that our budget in the current year closes out properly. We are looking at a combination of things. One is we are looking at our fuel suppliers what are the options there? Are there ways to lock in prices with them? Even if we lock in a price today, which by the way, the prices have come down quite a bit. The first couple months of this fiscal year, we had high prices. So we've had some deficits in fuel in those earlier months, and now we're seeing surpluses. We're looking at hedging fuel, figuring out how can we do something with that. Our neighbors down the street at PRTC OmniRide do something with that. There's a lot of questions around that, and some questions of how much of that we can do. We are a quasi-governmental entity, but we are not a city department. I know that there's some things to figure out about when you're hedging fuel. Are you following, are you able to do that even under a public process? And what are the restrictions? But the other one is we're looking at the COG contracts to figure out, are there possible ways that we can use that to ensure more stability in the fuel prices? So we're looking at a couple of different things. That combined with a couple of other things are short-term, like we're going to act on those within the next month because we feel like this is the right time to do it. We actually are seeing fuel prices today well below even our budget target, our revised budget target in the current year. So if we could lock it in some way, that would provide some much needed stability for myself, Edward, Kendall, and others who this really stresses everyone out as these things go up and down over time.
So Josh, is the fuel and lubricants with the electricity or is utilities?
I believe utilities includes electricity. Edward, please chime in. Yeah, the fuel, go ahead, Edward.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that comment. I don't think
yeah, his mic
close
off.
enough
Sorry.
to the microphone. Yeah.
So Edward, the question is, are the fuel and lubricants include the electricity for the buses, or is that the utilities section include the electricity for the buses?
Electricity for the buses is under the utilities section, yes. Not under the fuel and lubricants.
Okay, so can you break out what's for the buses versus what's for the building and everything else or not?
So we don't have very clear information on that just yet because the way that our electricity bills are presented. One of the things that we do have this year is a grant for charge management. And so we're hoping that helps us to get better insight into what the true cost of charging the buses is. I can tell you for the budget, what we did was we took past usage, we took the energy, the EIA.gov estimates on kilowatt hours, and then we trended up based on essentially the number of buses we have and historic trends. So that's how we got the FY25 number for the utilities.
And can you also see a per gallon fuel savings, not necessarily cost, but savings due to using the electricity and the electric buses instead of the diesel?
So we do know kind of we have estimates on where the two kind of, where our cost of per mile electric bus is versus per mile diesel bus. So we do build in also kind of the percentage of our fleet based on percentage of electrics, what the usage has been. That's built into our fuel estimates as well. So we don't, we do take into account the percentage and portion of our fleet that is electric. And so that goes into the calculations to get that budget number for fuel as well.
So, and then just two quick things, and I don't need an answer, but it'd be nice to see like what the per mile cost is, breaking it out on, an average fuel cost, diesel and electric. I think that'd be interesting. And then also, does the city still, is the city's electric rate still disincentivize more uses of electricity? In other words, the more you use, the higher the rate goes, where it should be the opposite?
So to the first item, I would be very happy to bring back to this board kind of a presentation on the per mile diesel versus electric costs, kind of what we have for that. I would definitely like to bring that back to this board as a presentation. And then to your second point, I believe that is accurate, that the more usage leads to higher rates.
We need to renegotiate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, the intertwining component is a challenge because and I don't, between Edward, all the finance folks in this room, I don't know how they figure it out. There's a lot of moving parts there when it comes to all these buildings and all this electrical service.
Convenience subsidizes the bus and then they charge us more for use of electricity. I mean, or someone does.
They are on the bus, they're on the school bus side.
Okay.
That's a component on the
Well,
school bus
still,
side.
that's
Yeah.
still ridiculous. Like selling cigarettes and baseball cards.
Looks like art.
Yeah, just a couple questions. On the fuel line item, and it's showing a reduction for 25. Is that driven purely by experience, like what you're experiencing with fuel rates now? Or are you building in some of these strategies or tactics that you mentioned that could reduce it? Is it both, or is it just this is what it's been lately and we're projecting it out?
It's a little bit of both, and I'm gonna let Edward talk about it because we spent a lot of time looking at these figures that he's come up with. So
Yeah.
Yeah, so for the
it's
fuel
hard.
estimates in the budget, it is not anticipating the hedging yet. That we're exploring the hedging right now, but we didn't want to make any assumptions of that when we built the budget, just because we are not sure exactly which strategy we will pursue eventually. So the number for the fuel in the FY25 budget is a combination of what we have seen as far as fuel, what the trends for diesel costs by the EIA have been. We reduced that slightly because we don't pay taxes on fuel. And then we use that to come up with a anticipated cost per gallon for the next fiscal year. And then that's trended out using essentially our, the miles per gallon that we're seeing on our diesel buses, building in a little, cushion there just because some of our older buses are less, that is an average miles per gallon. And that's kind of how we trended out. So that's how we come up with the fuel cost for our budget number. I'd be happy to kind of break that out if anyone wants to see all the math that goes behind that as well.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Chair, I have two more questions. If that's all right. On the revenue for charter services, what's informing that number? I guess what are we, is it just that's what it was before the Fed money came into play, or what are we thinking that means for us providing service?
So the number for the charter revenue, the anticipated number, is kind of based on the charters that we know we typically get the past revenue, because even though we took it out of our budget, we've still been doing charters, and so that's kind of what has gone into coming up with that number. It's kind of historic performance of charters, and then just kind of trending that out and what we anticipate being able to do in the next year.
Okay, thank you. And then this last was just curiosity with the slide on the screen, Edward, is the platform hours. Is it possible to isolate Metro Bus's platform hours just for Alexandria?
I can look into their budget. I can't recall off the top of my head if their budget broke it down by jurisdiction. I know some things they have broken down by jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But I can go back into their budget and see if that's something I can come up with.
Because we can break out our Metro Bus subsidy for the year. I'd be curious of what, all the impacts of their formula and all the bits and pieces in it, what that does.
I can definitely look into that.
It's an interesting thing to know. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that actually might be helpful for us. That's something I don't think we've done before, which is to ask the city, what is it that you're paying for Metro Bus and how many hours of service are you paying for? And just doing some flat calculations on that and doing some side-by-side comparisons with Dash services. But the Metro formula, of course, is a mess. It's so good.
when just looking at the overall number, raised an eyebrow for me because there's, so many, Fairfax County makes one little decision about their Metro Bus service and all of a sudden our subsidy goes up and we didn't understand how they came to be, because it's all proportional, so be interesting to see.
We need to vote basically to allow you to affirm the
Right.
submission.
So
We need to vote to allow you to affirm the submission you've sent to. OMB.
correct, you'll affirm the submission. Again, the next steps will be, we'll meet with OMB staff, we'll work through their questions, any comments and concerns will be a part of the budget process. We'll make sure that any adjustments that need to be discussed are discussed, and once the budget process goes through, we'll come back to you all, provide you with an update of where we are on things, try to keep you informed, and then in the late spring, ask you to approve the final budget.
Is there a motion to adopt the current services budget? Moved by Matt, second. Jason? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Abstaining? Okay, 3 abstentions. So, well, 3 staff.
Catch that, Beth?
All
You
right.
can just always assume that. Okay, thank you. So moving along here, talk about a couple of updates, exciting announcements. One is that we have been able to bring back Stuff the Bus thanks to the planning and marketing teams that have worked hard on making sure this happens. This is a partnership with Carpenter Shelter. You can see on the screen as well as in your board packet, the dates and times that it's a trolley bus is out there for collecting lightly used clothing, new or lightly used clothing for adults or children, as well as food items, non-perishable, ideally, toiletries, toothbrushes, toothpaste, etc. We also have a box here at the office. If you happen to have lugged something along that you would like to donate, you're more than welcome to, but want to just share the word there and thank the teams that have been out there in the community working on that. I actually got to see Fox 5 did a little blurb on it, so that was pretty cool. They picked up on that. As requested at the last meeting, we have a date for the 40th anniversary and we have some details. So our 40th anniversary celebration will take place on Saturday, March 9th at the Masonic Temple. We are working on developing the program now and trying to put together the bits and pieces for that, but we do know that we are looking for sponsors to help raise that money. We do not have any money budgeted, or we're not going to be using any budget money to fund this project. Our goal is a $40,000 budget for this. This is inclusive of catering, refreshments, beer and wine, and entertainment, such as maybe a band. So my ask to you all is this: if you know of local resources that would be interested in partnering with us, that would be interested in being sponsors, we have some sponsor levels. We have some tiers that have been set up, so there's some recognition of our vendors and whatnot that have worked with us. If you know some bands that are great, if you know some DJs that are great, if you've got connections for catering, we would really appreciate any of all of those. My understanding is that the venue is providing through the venue rental is basically the tables and chairs and whatnot. Everything else we need to bring in. Believe that the capacity is 300 for this event. We are going to be sending out save the dates. All of you will be receiving a save the date if you haven't already. Good, that's good, good to hear. And we welcome you. Just please make sure you RSVP with Beth. We've also included past leadership from DASH and DASH board, state officials, local officials, and city council members. And of course, the staff here at DASH are invited. So we're managing that number very carefully. We want to make sure that our folks are able to attend. We realize that typically in the past, not all of them can make it for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're working. So we've tried to keep the sort of, call it a VIP list small. Although Martin did get on me a little bit about it, saying, be careful, this list is getting too big, but I think we'll be able to make it work. But yes, Kendall, you had a question.
There's a lot of, oh, sorry. The kids at TC and their different musical organizations and the relationship with Dash and the kids and moving the kids around, and maybe there's a way to exploit their talent and have like the TC jazz band or something like that that has the kids be the music Sounds it.
I
And
love
they
it.
might be affordable.
Like a performance of some sort. I believe it's going to be kind of a fun sort of fancy event. We'll of course have remarks. We'll have dinner. We'll have all of the things, and it'd be great to be able to showcase some talent and whatnot too.
Josh, you said the budget is 40,000. Did you say 40,000?
That's our target.
Okay, that's and I
If-
just
if we
wanted
can-
to,
if
I
we can
wasn't
get
sure if that
more
was a
than that-
coincidence. No. I wasn't sure if that was a coincidence because it's the 40th anniversary. And I wanted to make sure, I wanted to make sure I didn't say. So two quick thoughts. One, it strikes me that there is a large corporation that made a big announcement in the city this morning that is going to be bending over backwards to win hearts and minds in the weeks ahead. And I would probably start the sponsorship requests there.
That's a great point.
I would second that, but like, is there like a form or a sheet that you can share with us? for
Yeah,
people
so-
To have the information about sponsorship levels and deadlines for them to like sign on.
Admittedly, the
how's
group
that
has been working very hard to get some of this stuff in place along with everything else going on. So there was actually a committee meeting this morning that fleshed out a number of these details. So I would imagine by the end of this week, we can maybe have some of those
Yeah.
details put out there. I do know that I was asked to let you know if you know anybody, you can redirect them to Ray or Beth, or me, it doesn't really matter. Or if you have ideas, but yeah, we're going to try to get something probably more formal put together in the coming days. Our target though was to make sure that we had the information for you all, because we really want to make sure you all are there. Sorry, go ahead.
One other thought, just sort of using the anniversary as an opportunity to reflect on sort of what Dash has done and continues to do for the city. Over the course of the year, are you guys considering doing sort of like special one-off line 40 routes to sort of say like days where there's big events and, you know, sort of connecting one part of the city to the other for the literally like one day pop-ups, but all branded as line 40 and sort of this way to just have Dash show up more presently in different communities and around different things that sort of, you know, are tied into the fabric of the city?
I think that with some positive forward progress that we've made in helping to alleviate some of all of the stuff that's on Martin's lap right now, I'm not at liberty to talk in details, but I know that the team is working hard to get what's now been a vacant position for over a year that is supposed to do all of this stuff filled. That I think those would be really great opportunities to do that. And I think that certainly the team has developed this little logo and some ways to kind of build us opportunities to showcase throughout the course of our 40th year. You know, all of that that fun stuff. So, yeah. I mean, if you want to come join the committee, we could use some help. Be careful. But yes, much more to come. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
just had one suggestion, Josh, and I'm mindful of what you said about the limitations in terms of numbers, but as we think about people who have been very important to Dash, I have many people who've been riding Dash for decades, and I think we probably have a way to identify who some of those are, given customer service and other outreach that we do. But I think, you know, it'd be great to see, you know, some of our longtime riders who may have great stories and affections for Dash to be included in a celebration of the 40th anniversary.
I mean, Martin and his team did a phenomenal job at the ridership.
Oh, yes.
event,
I mean,
like bringing
that-
stories like that. So maybe something like that. And I do want to be clear that this is not this.
Well, I
March
see you're
9th
having
is
other
not the
events, but I
only,
just feel
yeah.
like if we have someone who's been riding Dash for 40 years and been out there sort of as an unofficial ambassador for us, and we know about that person, we should probably try to at least invite them just as such a measure of goodwill to thank them for their loyalty to us. And I know the DAC will be included in that as well, so we're going to get rider representation there. But I just would hate to show up at an event where it's mostly, you know, people who've been obviously champions of the system and important stakeholders, but you know, when the riders are just like, oh, we weren't allowed to come to the fancy celebration. So, you know, just to keep that in mind.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right, well, much more to come on that. Last item here, some good news. Shout out to our friends at TNES for the success working with Dash to implement some improvements. There's actually more than just what I show here. There's more information in your packet where we've been able to get some concrete pads put in. These are critical for ADA accessibility, recognizing obviously that bus stop improvements include things like shelters and benches and signs and stuff like that. But we recognize that a lot of this stuff takes a lot to get done. I mean, it's not unique to Dash or Alexandria. It feels like everywhere I've gone, it's like, why is a bus stop so complicated? Just a shout out to the team there and some thanks for that, just showing you some of those improvements that have been put into place, and there are more to come.
And thank you so much for highlighting that too in the report, because obviously it's an area of priority, and I hope Bob Gronenberg is watching as well, because I think these are important things that the community can see as well. It sounded like in the packet these were specifically selected because of proximity to preschool or Head Start programs. Can you say more about that? And are there other opportunities to leverage or certainly to identify themes around stops that need improvements?
We'll let the man who's really heavily involved in this talk about it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, yes. So this that specific aspect of this was part of came out of a partnership that we had with a local nonprofit agency that works on improving access to low-income Head Start preschool centers. And I'm blanking on the name of the organization, but it's in your packet. But they had identified a couple Head Start centers in our area, and we were able to make these changes and improvements. One of these bus stops we moved just closer to the center. Actually, there were two locations, one at Cora Kelly and one at the Minokan and King Street location, where we were able to move the stop so it's actually closer to the Head Start Center. So it's a shorter distance that they have to travel, in addition to the accessibility improvements that we made. There was actually an article in the Virginia Mercury, I think about a month or two ago, that highlighted some of those. It kind of was about the deficiencies in terms of bus access to those centers, but it actually highlighted Dash and Alexandria as an example of what we can do to help improve that. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Mark.
All right, so last item of super great news. Our ridership is continuing to break records. And so we can formally announce that our October has been the highest on record. In fact, taking a look back pre-pandemic, October itself was 35% higher than the pre-pandemic average. That's the entirety of the life of the system. And a 30% increase versus our previous year, which was our highest year on record, right? And am I saying it right that that is actually the highest ever? Because May wasn't quite there. So that's the highest single month in the history of Dash's existence. So I don't know what happens when we carry 500,000 people in 1 month, but I think we're gonna have to find some way to pop a bottle of champagne in the right place. It's just really great stuff. So just wanted to show the effect that everyone's hard work has been having on this and the use of the system. Before I wrap up my report, I'm going to bring in the financials discussion now, so that then when we move over to the planning stuff and we talk about the ATSP and whatnot, and Martin wraps up, then you all can adjourn and go on your way. So I only have one slide here, but I want to talk more about what you see in your packet. In your packet, you've got the current financials, and you will see the projections. You will see that our projection is still showing a year-end deficit in the area of about $35,000. We've been continuously trying to revise this and work some more realities into it. And I know that Edward is still looking at various ways to interpret the data and the information of what we have so far, but we want to be early on in the process talking about what our challenges are. So fuel costs always have historically been our biggest issue in the budget, and fuel costs started out our fiscal year quite high, but have since gone down quite a bit. We talked earlier about trying to lock some of that in. Even if it were to go lower, if we could somehow lock in our price or hedge a number of months, it still would bring us more predictability to the budget, which I think is a really important component here. We need an understanding of where things are going, so that we don't end up with fuel prices skyrocketing again and ending up in a bad place. One thing to note is that half of the electric bus fleet was out of service throughout the fall. This has been driven by the Proterra bankruptcy. So half of our bus fleet is Proterra's, and they have been sidelined between a combination of recalls that have not been addressed and other issues that have caused them to be out of service. The good news is the team has been able to get them back in service and got some service bulletins to understand what are the issues that the recalls affect and how do we spot them and pull the bus off of out of service. But we had parked them outside, out of the building, because we didn't want to deal with an electric bus that was under a recall that wasn't being addressed. The good news is that Proterra, yeah, exactly. The good news is that Proterra has been, the bankruptcy is moving forward and they have received bids, winning bids on their various systems. Battery is going to one group. The bus piece is going to another group. It's an interesting group because it's someone out of the West that mainly did small, what we call a cutaway style bus, or sometimes people might think of them as little airport shuttles or like Metro Access vans. But they were the ones who bid on them. And so we think they're going to be looking to move themselves in the market. So as a result, they released some of the locks on some of the things that Proterra was held back from doing, i.e. travel and other items. They couldn't basically spend any more money. So they weren't able to come and address what we needed them to address. They are back on the road, not all of them, but most of them are back on the road. And so we are trying to get those back out there. But we did notice a difference. It's a contributing factor. It's not the only factor, but it's a contributing factor. But I want to point out that fuel is not our big issue this year. Our big issue this year is overtime. We have up and down over the years dealt with this at Dash. We've made great headway on it. Then we kind of fall back. Then we have some better headway. But I want to speak to really what's contributing to this. The overtime issues that we're dealing with are not issues of abuse or in some way our teams not properly managing what they're doing. They are a combination of factors. One, and the first and foremost being seniority-based overtime assignment. Contractually, we are obligated to assign overtime whenever it happens to the most expensive people in the organization. And they most of the time take it. And so our overtime is not only overtime, but it's overtime on the highest, very highest paid operators out there. This is not unique to Dash. It's something that is in the contract. It's not coming out. We can't do anything about it. But we do try to manage it as much as we can. Our extra board, which is the group of people that is in place on standby to cover when people don't show up at work, is understaffed and undersized. So we are working to figure out how to right size the extra board, get the right number of operators in place to account for call outs, absences, people who are out sick and whatnot. We are dealing with 180 plus operators these days. It's a large chunk of people. There are a lot of people who are going to either be out for scheduled reasons or unscheduled reasons, and we have a lot of service to put on the road. So those are going to be an issue. We are dealing with outdated policies as they relate to attendance. I want to give a shout out to Stephanie, our Chief Operating Officer, and Ryan, our Director of Operations, who are in the audience and who are relatively new to their posts and are aggressively attacking this. They are putting new policies in place, addressing overtime usage as well as attendance issues, so that they are reflective of what is appropriate for our industry. But people have to understand in transit, this is one of the industries you can't be late and you can't not show up and you can't not call. And we need to reduce our tolerance for that. And historically, Dash has been incredibly tolerant of that, much more so than most organizations. So we're cleaning that up and addressing that. Manual scheduling, believe it or not, Dash is still run primarily manually, despite some of the technology we have in place. We do not have an operations management platform. It is a combination of Excel and other tools. We do have a CAD AVL system, but that is not an operations system. That is simply a bus management system. So that doesn't deal with the personnel movements in the same way that larger systems do. That's going to be a longer fix, but we have talked as a board about the importance of technology. You all have reflected that in your priorities to me. We are working on that and we are addressing that. We've been talking with the city, and I know that Hillary has been working hard to put funds in place to address some of this technology that will help to improve these efficiencies. We also realized that charters, when they were being done at a premium cost. And so we need to address that. So we have immediately put changes in place that have halted that practice. nobody was doing anything wrong. They weren't not following instructions. It's just that that's one of those things that sort of automatically happens. And we started diving in to say, what's going on here? That was a contributing factor. Small piece, but it's one worth addressing. We're also making sure that we trim and affect some buses that might be out there that are responding to overcrowding situations. This may not be a popular action, but it is one that we're putting into place right now. We feel it's necessary in order to balance this process. Basically, in the event that we have an unusual circumstance where a bus is overcrowded or there's a situation that service might be affected for a group of people, we're sending additional resources out to do that. That's not really captured in the budget. That is a quality of service item that we're very proud of, but we're also recognizing we need to be very, very strategic about the use of that. So we've dived into that to try to figure out ways to address that. I'm not going to say it's going to adversely affect passengers, but we may end up with some more overcrowded buses in some situations. So one of the things we're doing is trying to get our articulated buses on those services. We're also trying to adjust our purchasing plans to buy more articulated buses. We need to look at the CIP further out, figure out how to get more of the 60-foot buses in the fleet. Because right now we only have 4. We've got 2 more coming. That's 4 out of 100. And while they may not be needed all day, every day, the more of them we can have, the less of the overcrowding issue we're going to deal with. So those are some strategies. So we've put those, we've addressed those. We've been looking at those. We've been making some immediate effects. We've also had issues where we've had vacancies in our supervisor team, and we are working aggressively to fill those. That was an unexpected issue for us. Not only our supervisor team, but our yard masters and clerks. That's just some attrition, some turnover for various different reasons. But that's a smaller set of people. So when you lose one of those resources, we have service almost 24 hours a day. So what's happening is that when that person retired or left the organization, that is a chunk of work that has to be covered, and it's covered entirely by overtime. So this is probably one of arguably our biggest focus right now. In fact, Ryan and Stephanie have worked with the team. They come to me with a restructuring plan that creates efficiencies, provides better support, and is actually going to net us potentially some savings in the long term. And so they came forward with that proposal. I green-lighted it. They've been in the process of implementing it, and it's going quite well. The team is excited about it. Our leadership team in operations is excited about it, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that have an effect. So those are some of the things that we put into place, and I will say that that has been a big contributor to these overtime issues. It's the combination of those. There has been some overtime in other departments. We've addressed those where we can and tried to make sure we look at that. The last thing I would point out is that there will always be overtime. There will always be overtime in transit. There's always overtime in police. There's always overtime in fire. There's always overtime in any service that is covering sort of 24-hour-a-day service. And it's just because you can't simply build out a schedule that everyone works 8 hours and, you know, they have an hour for lunch and they go home at the end of the day and they don't incur overtime or they aren't short and we overpay them. So those are some uniquenesses to transit. I will say that I am pleased with the way that the team has been working to address those factors internally and try to build a system in place that's going to really minimize that. We just have to acknowledge that it's probably going to be there. So I know that Edward has also built into the budget a more appropriate overtime figure. I think our previous overtime was somewhere around 8%. Was the projection in the budget, and I think we've bumped that up to about 12%. And that's not saying we're just going to continue to incur overtime because we want to. It's saying that that's probably the more realistic overtime that is inevitable. You can't build service, you can't operate a bus system without there being overtime. So we need to account for that properly in the budget. So those things have been built into that. And the last thing I'll say before I open up for some questions, I know you guys have some questions. I want to talk briefly about, well, let me answer your questions about that stuff, because I want to talk also about vehicle maintenance parts and supplies, because that is the other item here on this chart. But let me pause there. It looked like you guys had some questions.
So one question, one observation. So on the having to pay overtime at a premium, obviously it is what it is. It's in the contract, right? But it does strike me that we have also sat around this table and talked about the challenges of recruitment and retention, and that also comes with a cost when we are trying to find people and train them. I would be curious at some point, as you guys sort of do employee surveys and get feedback, the extent to which sort of seniority being the preference for getting overtime is an incentive to become senior. And I think it'd be really interesting to get some insight into how much that is a driving factor around retention. And again, not that it changes the fact that we're paying for it, but I do think it makes a little bit of the kind of ROI argument for why there is a reason to do it that has some savings in other areas of the operation. The question I had, like the notion that half our buses on the electric fleet were out because of something that was entirely outside of our control is like, I would be eager to see you guys do some sort of strategy memo that's like, what are we doing going forward to prevent this from happening with the other company or some like the fact that this is a newer technology, right? Like I think one of the I love that we are embracing this electric fleet, but what is the kind of risk we are taking on around some of these technologies suddenly not being available or suddenly being available but at an incredibly steep financial premium? I would love to sort of get a sense of how you guys are thinking through what that environment looks like and what we can do to provide as much stability as possible within what we can control.
I appreciate that remark. In fact, one of the things that was already discussion is as we're looking at retiring vehicles. I think we were talking about this, just 2 days ago, maybe? In my office, we were talking about the timing of the expansion of our facility, along with the timing of disposal of some buses. And the good news is the city has found a new location. They're gonna be clearing out that lot, which means potentially organizing it in the right way, we can mothball some buses until we work through these issues, particularly with Proterra, because the future is still unknown. Right. And we still have long-term concerns about the support there. New Flyer has been around as long as buses have been around. So, and they're publicly traded. They're a little more stable. And they're our other half. But to your point, it's still, it's still half the fleet. And so a strategy also of retaining some of those assets in the short term until the volatility works out is also one of the things we talked about. But I've made a note here. I like that, and we'll get you a memo on that. Yeah.
Josh, is there lease buses to fill in the gap until these buses are back on the road?
So yes, there is the ability to do that, although we haven't needed to do that because our ability to provide service has not been affected by these buses being down. It's really been more that we aren't able to capture their efficiency. And although it's a small amount, it is having an impact on our bottom line fuel. We are noticing fuel is going down as a result of the use of the electrics. And so strategizing as much as possible to use them helps that. And that's kind of what we were pointing at.
So operationally, do we always prioritize getting the electric buses out of the road
Yes,
first?
we prioritize electric buses and we strategize bringing them in to charge them to run them at peak times a day.
Josh, I just wanted to, as we talked about overtime in the past, really the key focus has been on the vacancies and the operators and things you've done, recruitment bonuses, the hiring events, and really have improved that. It sounds like from what you said, you've talked about some vacancies in the supervisory and the clerk and support yard master. It sounds like that piece of it though is still working very well, because I just thinking going back a year ago that was sort of the main concern when we were, or even maybe 2 years ago, talking about drivers of overtime. That was primarily what we were hearing about. We've talked about some of the other issues as well, and I appreciate that your team's doing a really deep dive into this, because some of these things were new to me. Some we've kind of talked about before, especially on the attendance side and other things that can affect if somebody's not there, I guess, to do their first run and then pulling somebody else out. Standbys, I don't know if we've talked about as much, but I just would like to get a sense of, since that was kind of the core issue we looked at, is that still well controlled?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I know that, Jesse, you have to leave. I wish you had been here last December, because I realized that last December is the meeting where we did the deep dive conversation about operations. At the time, our director of operations, Kevin Hernandez, and he talked a lot about these factors. I think that we'll have an opportunity once all of this restructure is done and once we've kind of seen how things shake out to talk a little bit about what are the continuing struggles after that. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to hold you up. I just want to say, you know, I think if I'm interpreting your question correctly, you're asking whether the operator overtime is the bigger issue here or non-operator overtime. I'm not sure.
I guess
understood
when
you.
we've talked about overtime in the past, it's always been about bus operators
Yeah.
and specifically about that there had just have been vacancies. I mean, now we're hearing now that, and some of these, again, we have discussed these before, but some of these were things that hadn't really, at least at our level, hadn't come into the conversation. So I'm just trying to figure out if what used to be our biggest driver, if that is still an issue in terms of the overtime, the vacancies specifically.
It will always be the biggest piece, right? Because it is the largest part of the organization and it's the place where the most of it happens. I think the reason you hear me talking about these other factors is these are things that we can change and control and create efficiencies by looking at our organizational structure, figuring out how we do things. How do we get the service out on the road? And that's a conversation we haven't had before as a board. Those are things I haven't talked to you about before, largely because we haven't been able to get there. You know, frankly, we've had
needed
so
the
many other
bodies
things.
before you
You know,
can.
when you're sitting there trying to keep your nose above water and breathe, you're not busy over here trying to look at how do we create an efficiency in this part of the organization. You're just trying to figure out how you keep the lights on, right? The good news is we've really come out of that. We're now in a much better place and we've got a team in place who's really got the resources and the assets. And a big part of this is some of the reorganization structure where we put a COO now in place to be able to dedicate resources to talking about this. These are all things we didn't have before. And so that's part of why you're hearing about it from me now. It's also part of why we're identifying it as an opportunity to make some course corrections.
Okay.
So hopefully that helps.
But the core issue that you've come to us over the past few years of we've got to get more operators, we've got to have policies that allow us to hire people efficiently. That's working from what I'm hearing. You're getting that.
I mean, we're still short a little bit, but we have done quite well, right? I mean, we are not in the place we were. Now, you heard me talk about attendance. We could be fully staffed, but we've got a lot of people out. So that's the next phase, right? Addressing that. Could that send us into a little bit of a dip? Potentially. Because a stricter attendance policy is going to mean that people are going to have to be at work more and we might lose those people. So I do want to be transparent that that is one of the factors that we'll also be watching very closely to navigate in this process. And we know that it could be a challenge, but we're trying to face it head on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate
So when you talked about hiring, you guys came up with some, I thought, good, good ideas about how to do your overhires and kind of tackle that piece. When you do scheduling, do you automatically account for like a certain percentage that's going to be out so that it's not overtime and you just have those people there? Or have we been so just like right at the line of being able to staff what we need to staff that you don't have the ability to do that?
By definition, that's what an extra board is intended to do. And what I'm saying is that we believe the extra board is undersized. So yes, we're probably coming into the day, at the beginning of the day, without enough resources in the door to account for the people being out. And so some of that, the other thing that we have to be careful about is, and this is something that Edward works on with Martin, Stephanie, Ryan, the whole team comes together is this fine line of when does it cost more to bring more people in compared to when does it cost more to pay overtime? And that's always a moving target too. So that's one of the things we're looking at as well, is trying to make sure we're accounting for that in the equations. Because of course you bring people in, you have the full loaded benefits costs, which can be a substantial chunk of it.
So is the extra board the overtime? Is that always overtime?
No, extra board is actually bidded
Actually,
work.
okay. So it
In
doesn't
an
have to go to
ideal world,
seniority.
in an ideal world, a set of 10 people would come on the extra board and they would sit in that lounge and they would play pool. And people would walk in and say, why do you got time to play pool? It means because the operation's working. I'm here in case something goes down. The reality though is if you do see people in there playing pool, they're on a split shift. They're not in there because they're extra board. They're out driving. And that's what we've got to address. We've got to get to a place where the ops team isn't coming at the beginning of the day and saying, oh my gosh, I had 5 call outs today and my extra board is already on the road. What am I going to do? In the end, I got to give them credit. They're getting it done. They're getting it done. People are really getting it done, but it's costing. And that's what we're seeing. So we're trying to figure out how to support them, make sure they have the resources they need. The organization is in the right place and the procedures are in place to make sure it happens the right way. I want to talk briefly.
Josh, I'm sure, just one more question before we move on from that. Are we seeing more missed trips as a result of this?
I don't think so. I don't think, I mean,
We were, last year, we saw a huge
okay.
And remind me what a normal level would be. Okay. So it's like a 0.02% That's okay. 2 out of every 1,000. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the other item here is maintenance parts and supplies, which is another area that is really hurting us right now. I want to give you some comparisons because this is a challenge that it's not going to go away. We looked back, we asked our parts folks to take a look at what's going on here. Compared to 2001, today, tires are 50% more expensive, batteries are 70% more expensive, emissions control systems are 87% more expensive. Number one failure point on diesel buses, by the way. Small parts such as mirrors, et cetera, are 27% more expensive. For comparison to last year, a battery was $200. It's now $300. A tire last year around this time was $582. This year it's $694. So it gives you some perspective of what's going on. The other thing that we have noted and we have tuned into is that the parts on our new buses are substantially more expensive, and even more so on the electrics. So an electric bus compared to a diesel, I asked the team to research this to understand a comparison. Air compressors are on every bus. Buses are driven by pneumatic systems largely, doors, seats, you know, all kinds of stuff, brakes. An air compressor on a diesel bus is $4,256. An electric bus is $9,465. It's 122% more expensive to put an air compressor on an electric bus than it is to put it on a diesel bus. So it just gives you some perspectives of some of the things that we're looking at. So what are we doing in regards to this? One thing is that we're taking a step back to evaluate our suppliers to make sure that our process of procuring this stuff is as competitive as possible. The contingency here is that we can't sacrifice service or quality of service. So we're not out there asking them to stop buying parts or to not repair things on buses that don't have to be repaired. That's not a place we can be. However, we can look at strategies. Perhaps we can reduce our inventory that we're carrying. Perhaps we can look strategically at tire purchases. A discussion just earlier this week. We've lost a lot of tires on the right side of buses. Wonder why? Well, we found out that at the Pentagon, they were doing some construction and they had narrowed the lane that the buses exited. Right where the lane narrowed was a sharp metal plate sticking out of the curb. So as the drivers were trying to make it into this small space, they were cutting the turn too close and bumping the right rear tire against it and resulting in slashing the sidewall of the tire. So we were having double the number, this is double, how many, like double the number of tire replacements going on. So we're all sitting here and talking about this, trying to figure out, I'm just giving you all some insight into these conversations we're having. So of course, there's a combination of ways to attack that. One is, of course, training, messaging, making sure our workforce knows about it. The other is, can we talk with the Pentagon? Can we figure out what's going on with that construction? Can we address this, right, example? The other is, can we look at the type of tire we're buying? Does it make sense to buy a more expensive tire that has a more robust sidewall that's going to withstand more of the impacts? Because I'm going to be honest with you, in an urban environment, buses run up on curbs all the time. Her team probably gets tired of seeing all the marks all over curbs everywhere. But that's just part of the reality of it, right? So if you can find a way to make that rubber more durable and the tire not to pop, maybe we can have some savings. So just again, surface level examples of the things we're working on, because I just really wanted to spend the time today to talk with this board and help you kind of understand some of the things that we're talking about internally and what we're trying to do. In the end, we did take some immediate decisive actions. I have ordered a freeze on all scheduled spending that is non-essential. I have ordered a freeze on any travel, training, and other meeting-related expenses, with the exception of such cases where those are related to accreditation or some sort of a essential service that is provided. We have also looked at, again, at the restructuring options. We are also deferring non-essential projects until the spring. Our goal here is to explore opportunities to withhold expenditures to help balance the budget towards the end of the year. And if we can see changes in these other items that are much harder to control, if we find those improvements, then we can reactivate those activities. So that's part of our fiscal management policy in that regards. The other thing, as I mentioned already, are looking at hedging fuel costs, lock-in pricing, vendor relationships, and we have also accelerated our efforts to discard of surplus property, including vehicles. I will be candid. Everywhere I've been, closets find things. We found a closet. Ken will get a kick out of this. You know, the old days when everything was on paper. We found a closet with like 14 file cabinets, and we don't need that stuff. Can we sell that? Can that money come back and help to address it? And sure enough, it could. And so those are things, even small amounts, that can potentially help. So those are some of the things that we've also put into place, and we'll continue to update you as the fiscal year goes on. Happy to answer any questions or move right along to keep you from being stuck here any longer. We sure can. Yeah, so you do have action items within Martin's, so I want to get you those.
Evening again. So 2 items tonight, both requiring action from the board. First is a follow-up to an item that we had last month. This is the Alexandria Strategic Plan, ATSP, which we are proposing would replace our pre-existing TDP, Transit Development Plan process, as our vehicle through which the board considers, reviews, and approves annual service and fare changes. There's a memo in your packet that provides some of the details in terms of what exactly this would mean. The long and short of it is that there would not be much impact in terms of the board's authority. There's no changes to the board's authority in terms of service and fare decision making. This is really just allowing us to become consistent with the new state requirements for TSP, Transit Strategic Plan. So you can see some of the contents there. They're very similar to what we had in the TDP. The timeline will be similar as well. We'll have our spring process that will probably start in February or March at the latest. We'll be doing our same public outreach efforts, hopefully expanded this year. But yeah, not much change, but just the document itself will be changing. And I would note that there's a memo here with the proposed change that the board will be adopting. There will also be some changes to the board policies and procedures document that will come at a later date when we have a more comprehensive update for that document. So, happy to take any questions. Oh. Yep, there's a schedule. This just lays out, so the TSP, based on state requirements, we're going to be doing it's kind of a major update every 5 years where we reevaluate it. Kind of this graph or this table is intended to show which sections will be updated. So you can see in major updates, the entire document will be updated. So we're doing a major update this year in the spring. For the annual in between years, it would just be an addendum where we're looking at capital projects, finance plan, and any service or fare changes. And then the five-year one is updating everything except for our first chapter, which is the vision and strategic vision and standards. So that's kind of what we'd be looking at for the next 10 years for this process.
Is there a motion to approve the transition to Alexandria Transit Strategic Plan from the TDP? Moved by Matt, or second? Hillary. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passed unanimously.
All right, thank you. Item 5B is our annual DRPT grant applications. We've had a lot of success with these programs over for as long as I've been here. The first one I'll highlight is our intern program. We are looking to extend that program into FY25 with hopefully two intern positions. We're requesting up to $110,000 to cover those. So we have that here. The other 2 projects are demonstration grants. These are kind of unproven technologies that Dash is trying to see if we would like to adopt or use fleet-wide. First is the actually, Josh, if you go one slide further, I'm going to switch up the order on you. So first one I want to cover is the through vision blind spot camera. This is a special two cameras mounted on the front of a bus that basically remove the blind spot of the pillars, the A and B pillars that drivers have to fight with. This is one of the main, I'm sure operations will tell you, this is probably one of the main sources of safety concerns and potential risk with pedestrian conflict. You have, as you can see in the top image there, they're showing where a pedestrian would cross and how there'd be an extended period where he or she would not be visible to the driver. So with the screen shown in the bottom picture, you would have visibility into that area, and the risk would be reduced, and it contributes to Vision Zero goals as well. So that is, yeah, sure.
And Matt, you had a question about this the last time we talked. I have been talking with VTLP, which is our insurance pool. They're very interested in this, and they're looking at ways that they can be partners as well. So, yeah, for sure. I mean, they do have we do have a grant. I don't know if you call it a grant or it's an annual allocation that the pool awards members that's used for safety related improvements. That's a fixed amount that we can always use. So we're looking at ways to use that as well. We always leverage that for things. Like one example it was used was the wheelchair securement equipment I think we bought so that we can train people on proper wheelchair securement here instead of in the buses. They paid for that. That's an example of VTL.
Those are on both pillars?
Correct.
Yeah.
And are they like video scoring?
Yeah.
Does sunlight ever reflect off them where you can't see?
Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. It's similar to like the armor that's like dark outside, it changes, but so it reacts instantly.
And with this grant funding, we're requesting up to $100,000. That would allow us to install this system on up to 5 buses, to pilot it, see how it works, get operator feedback on it, and then potentially see if we want to expand it to the rest of the fleet or future bus purchase.
The pool of funding you're talking about, is that the kind of thing they do? Like we do a test and say like, we like this was good, this helped us, drivers thought they had more visibility, and it can pay to expand the number of these in the system? Or can they pay for like, partner with us to pay for the local match portion of some of these things, or how does that funding?
The match piece might be a possibility. It's a small amount of money. And keep in mind that the pool is a pool of money that we've paid into. So it's sort of like questioning how are we paying our insurance money. But I think the vision for something like this, and I know you and I have talked about like affording to put technology on buses and also sustaining it. Something like this would probably be factored into the purchase of the bus, where we typically have flexibility within the purchase price to add things. Like one of the things is like wheelchair securement technologies that we're trying. But something like this would probably be more of a hardware piece as opposed to an ongoing software maintenance. Whereas I know the next time we're going to talk about, there's also that ongoing cost component, which we will have to figure out. So part of the idea of exploring it is, one, to figure out, does it work for us? Does it make sense to pursue it? Two, is if we pursue it, how do we pursue it? Yeah.
All right. And Josh, if you could go back one slide. The other pilot grant that we are looking to pursue is these infotainment or onboard passenger screens. We would be looking to retrofit 10 buses, and I will be turning it over to my colleague, Trevor Logan, to talk a little bit more about these screens and what they can do. Trevor is our transit technology coordinator. Thanks, Trevor.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, as Martin has explained to you, a new passenger information screen. These would potentially replace the current smaller amber colored LED screens that are currently on our buses for people that are visually impaired. This would be a way better system, more robust. You can see it at any point you're sitting in the bus. The benefits over the current system is the ability to show connections, transfer points. We can build in things like connecting at King Street, for example. We could show that your blue or yellow line train is coming in X amount of minutes, or your 32 is going to connect in X amount of minutes. also the potential to be able to remotely inform our customers when there's disruptions. That's a possibility with the system. Also, this also opens up advertising revenue stream. This system is so intelligent that as the bus is going down the line, if you hit a certain location, say the McDonald's here at a Wheeler, it can show an advertisement for that McDonald's as you're going down the line. Or you get the Fox Chase, you can get an advertisement for Harris Teeter. So it's really, really beneficial to the riders of Alexandria. We do currently have one bus that we are demoing the system with. We do have it downstairs for you guys to view once the board meeting is over. And I can show you everything that it does. To hope you guys consider it.
Thank you for bringing up, Trevor, I got a question for you. Thank you for bringing up the advertising part, because I was going to ask about that. I wanted to know if we know about systems that have done this before. It's the advertising, it's the revenue is there, but it's also, you know, just from person, it's like, you like having zones where you're free from that. And so I just wanted to kind of know if other systems that are using this are using the advertising feature, and also does it seem to I don't know for how long the ad appears, and if that interferes with somebody who is visually, you know, who needs to be able to see that signage, being able to then see where they are, versus that there's a McDonald's somewhere in the vicinity.
There are quite a few systems that are using the advertising feature. I know New York City, Charlotte, North Carolina is one of the two cities I can think of off the top that is currently using the advertising feature. One of the great things about it is that we can customize how far in advance that ad is shown, how long that ad is shown. One of the things that the system does do is, as say there is an advertisement showing, but you're approaching a stop, the stop announcement is what is priority. So if there's an ad showing, but we're approaching Beauregard and Fillmore, that ad will stop, and then the stop will show, and that is what, again, is the most important information on the system. So anything else becomes secondary.
Is the annunciator that's calling out the stops keyed to this as well? So if you have ads on it, is it going to announce the ad as well, or is it just going to read stop information?
The annunciator is just for the stops only, so the ads would just be a visual thing.
Okay.
If that was something.
Because Wilmata had, and I don't know if it was connected to this technology. Well, it wasn't. They didn't have these types of screens, but they were reading off ads through their annunciator system. I don't know if they still do that. I don't hear them as often, but it was very jarring because it was confusing if you were depending on the annunciator as to, you know, am I at George Washington University that I might take a class there, but I'm in Alexandria, so you know, but which it just I understand why they were doing it, is they were trying to raise revenue, which they desperately need. But I want to make sure that we're not interfering with the experience that people have on board with these. And so I guess as a board, we would have to talk further about whether to use that feature and what revenue it might bring up. But it's good to know that we've explored what the capabilities are.
Yeah, like I said, it's totally customizable. So if that's not what we want to do, then we don't do it.
Okay.
If that's something we want to do, then we do it. It's the capabilities and the possibilities are so vast with this system. So, you know, you can fine tune and decide what we do want and what we don't want.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Hillary.
I really like the concept of bringing in some ad revenue through this to pay for the ongoing operations and maintenance costs of the system.
I think we can vote on this because this will be also a grant going to DRPT. So
Well, before you do, I just want to recognize Trevor for sticking around. He's never been to a board meeting, I don't think.
No.
And really want to thank him for his work on this and all the other technology. So those buses out there and even the new ones, we're going to have brilliant, colorful signs. He's working on color coding the service so that from the distance, the sign will have illuminate colors based off of what service you're on. And he deals with all of the announcements, all the technology, all of the location, making sure that when you open up your transit app or your Dash bus tracker, the technology has been reporting properly and whatnot. So I just want to recognize him for his hard work and what he does and thank him for being here. And please, please, please go look on that bus. It's really much different to see in person than it is in a picture. And it's right outside the front door. It'll only take you a minute just to get a sense of what this is like.
And also too, that bus downstairs has become our guinea pig bus, if you will. So that bus actually does have the color destination sign, so you will be able to see that feature as well.
Yeah. Just another way to help make sure passengers have an easy way of figuring out what's going on there. So I'll turn it back to you.
Oh,
for the
sure.
action.
Sure. Thank you. Trevor.
Is there discussion?
Please, if you
Yeah,
have more questions.
on the internship, what's?
We're taking them one at a time,
Oh,
so
okay,
we'll do that
okay.
one next. Unless should we? Well, we were voting on them one at a time, but I guess we'll keep doing that. On the onboard, I'm sorry, did we? It's getting late. Did we vote on the blind spot camera pilot or no? We didn't. Okay, never mind. Let's go on to the intern then. So, do you want Martin to introduce it first, or do you want to just go ahead and ask your question?
Just a question, what's the $100,000? I know it's up to, what's that for? Is it a paid internship or is it? Okay,
Right, that would,
Okay.
that, if we did apply for the full 110,000, that would be for 2 positions, and that does cover benefits as well.
gotcha.
And we've had interns here for many years, and we have a number of them who work for us now. So it's been a good program.
And I know one is typically in marketing. Is the other floating, or is that in the planning?
So
Planning
DRPT
schedule.
has sort of changed the program over the last couple of years, so it's become more of a broad agency or organization-wide program. So they're not as tied to a specific department anymore. I believe we're planning this year that it'd be in the training department, and then they would kind of rotate around in different departments.
Okay. Have they always required? I assume that was in reading the description. That's a DRPT requirement that it be full time and that they receive all health insurance at least. Is that new?
It's not a requirement, but it's an eligible expense.
Okay.
So we've started offering that in the last few years.
I think it's great we're doing it. I hadn't noticed that before. So because I know, especially on the Capitol Hill, they're doing a lot of congressional offices are trying to at least pay interns, and that we can offer insurance as well really helps people in the position. Does it have to be full time in order for them to qualify for benefits? Is that why that we've made it a full time position?
That's a good question. I think so. I think that's yeah, I would say so.
In order to receive the benefits, does the
Okay.
I note that it also travel expenses are also eligible, so we'd be able to take the interns on potentially trips like to see the bus builds and other conferences and stuff like that.
Does that having it as a full time position, has that impacted our recruitment at all? That we're trying to work around people who are in school and their course schedule.
We were able to recruit 2 last year. I think that having full time helps at both our in part time school, part time classes. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just wondering. Thank you. So we can take all 3. Oh, we voted on the change of the strategic plan, not the grant application. So we can take all 3 as a block unless we need to separate any of them. Not seeing any indication we do. So if there's a motion, I'll take
So
it.
moved.
Moved by Matt, or second? Jaysha, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, passes unanimously. I think unless there's any other new business to come before the board, that our next meeting will be, I'll announce our next meeting will be Wednesday, January 10th. We're going to go to City Hall, 5:30 p.m. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Matt, second Art, all in favor? Aye. Happy holidays to all.